From Texas A&M, an Aggie, as Tom said. I don't believe, Tom, you weren't an Aggie, right?
No, red.
Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to George to further expand our understanding of what's happening in the world market, I believe, right?
Well, it's a little bit of everything. So thank you, Nate. It's good to be here. I'm excited to get here and talk. I think Nate's going to give me the hook if I need to, because hopefully y'all are interested to hear what I've got to say, because in all honesty, when Tom was talking up there earlier this morning and telling y'all what I was going to say, I was changing my presentation right then and there. So I have no idea what I'm going to say either. I'm interested to hear what I'm going to say. But it's good to be here. And I want to thank everybody. Like I said, Nate, Tom, Mike. I've worked with Tom and Mike for some time, and y'all are lucky to have them here. They're a wealth of knowledge and good folks. I also want to recognize two guys that came with me today. Brian Erbst from Texas A&M. He helps me in our center and the whole center and what we do. And Peter Zimmel from the University of Missouri, FAPRI at Missouri. And Mike talked about the partnership that he has with FAPRI and being part of FAPRI. Texas A&M and FAPRI have been partners for more than 30 years. So I appreciate those guys. They're the backbones of, I can get up here and ramble on, but those guys are really the backbones of what we do in our organization. So I'm excited to be here. Now, what am I going to cover? I don't know if I'm going to cover exactly what was in the description there, but hopefully you'll get something out of this, all right? So right off the bat, I thought I'd start with this little cartoon. It was actually fortuitous because I didn't realize this, but on the ride over, I learned that Tom's nickname is T-Bone. So he fits in this cartoon right here. But I did want to acknowledge, it's already been talked about by Tom and Mike, and I don't have to tell most of the folks in here, times are tough. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the 80s and some parallels in some ways it is and isn't, just because Tom said I would, and then I'll get on to some other things. So we do have a tough environment, and it's filled with a bunch of uncertainties, and that's not all of them listed up there, just put a few. But I'm also going to go through and talk about representative dairies and ranches and farms, kind of tell you what I do, my main job, what I do, and then talk something about the 2018 Farm Bill, in particular how it relates to dairy and some of the livestock issues in there. So this comes from the recently released Ag Census. It is done every 5 years, and Tom and Mike talked about this a little bit. But basically, you can look at the numbers here, and basically what it's saying is there's a trend of consolidation, right? You see the small farm size decreasing over time. But you see the second point here is that ag land value, it's up 208% since 1997. And I'll talk a little bit about land values as I move on here. As noted earlier, we talked about the age of all U.S. producers, and this is not just livestock and dairy, but also farming, is about 58 years old across the country. Now we've been dealing with this for some time in agriculture, and there's it's a big issue. I don't know exactly how you tackle it, because really and truly there's pretty high barriers to entry to get in when you talk about it. The cost of land, which has done nothing but go up. Access to credit, specialized equipment, and then you have to deal with the volatility that comes along with the prices. So it's really tough to get in if you weren't born into agriculture, or if you don't have a mentor. And I think we see more and more of that as I travel around, is people who want to get in, they start off with someone who's mentoring them. So I think that's one way where we can get some more young folks back into agriculture. The other way also is just have some better returns. But just going through some information here. This is on the U.S. level here, these first ones. Obviously we have ranches are down, but the herd size is up. Dairies are down overall. across the country, but the herd size or average per head is up. This is probably an interesting note. Herds with 500 or more cows represent only about 9% of all herds, but they're about 68% of total milk sales. So you have a bunch of small dairies and some what I would consider larger commercial scale dairies that are giving out most of the production in this country. And that's the same across farms, not just livestock operations, but also crop farms as well. But as it's been alluded to earlier, it's been a tough time in dairy. And this downturn in particular is causing a consolidation that has been happening for years. I mean, ever since we had farmers, we've been consolidating. If you go look at a chart going all the way back to the 20s, we've been consolidating. But this downturn is hastening that consolidation, particularly in dairy. There's no question about that. And in 2018, according to USDA, we had 2,700 registered dairies closed. That's a little over 7 a day going out of business in 2018. Then a couple of statistics from the census data in Nevada. The ranches were down, but the herd size average was about 294, according to the census data of USDA. And dairies actually registered were up. And that herd size was about 518 head. So Tom said I would touch on this, and he's right. We did do some work on this, not just our center, the Ag Food Policy Center at Texas A&M, but also a group of educators from all around the South put together a part of financial stress, and it's on our website. If you want to look at this, and these graphics come from that paper and those presentations that we have there. But here is it the 80s. Oh, if I could click. Is it the 80s? Well, one thing we had back in the 80s, and the 80s are put in this red here, was really high. This is consumer price index, so this is in high inflation. And inflation out here, if you went, still pretty minor. It's not really an issue. So is that similar? Probably not so much. Then to go interest rates in the 80s, somewhat to combat that rampant inflation, are really high. And these are in real terms, interest rates. And right now we have relatively, although they've increased some, we have relatively low real interest rates. But the value of farmland, and this is adjusted for inflation, while it hit its peak, and then we had the crash, and it came tumbling down, which caused a lot of bankruptcies, because there was a lot of lending back in the 80s done on asset values, the asset values of the land. I look back at the time. Well, we've just seen a steady march up higher over time. And, you know, I see this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my job, and I represent farms here in a bit, but I get to travel around the country meeting with producers. It's part of my job. And the downturn has hit every sector, dairy the hardest, but we haven't seen land values come down. I talk to people, I say, has your cash rent come down? No, very little. Has the value of your land dropped? Maybe a smidge. And part of that is, there's a number of reasons. Part of that is that there's a lot of pressure from outside of agriculture for land, be it from outside investment, be it people for recreational purposes, and that is in part keeping some of that up. And also producers who are in good financial standing, if a piece of land comes available, it may be their one chance in a lifetime to buy that piece of land. So they may be willing to stretch themselves and bid a little higher than maybe they can afford to buy that piece of land. But it's holding up, and land values are a lot higher. And so what everybody always says is this: the 80s, when they get to the U.S. farm debt to asset ratio, and we hit a peak over here of, I can't remember what it was, 23, 24% basically. We're not near that, but I will say if you continue this data out, it's starting to tick up. And I would argue that the debt to asset ratio is actually a backward looking measure, and that it starts to tell you what's already happened. And we're ticking up, and that tells me that we've already seen a lot more financial stress. And if you read any of the Federal Reserve writings that come out of like Kansas City and the central part of the U.S., they've been warning they're seeing loans, length of time to repay is lengthening, You're seeing more slow payments. You're seeing more defaults. All that's happening, and it's happening all across the country in all sectors of agriculture. So I would argue that, is it the 80s? No, probably not. Part of the reason why this is low is because those land values are high again and they're not coming down. But just to say it's not as bad as the 80s doesn't mean it's bad. It's just like, okay, so I didn't get my leg cut off, but I still broke it. That's still bad, right? You probably all know this, and Mike talked about the kind of production glut, but this is milk production in the United States, 2009 to 2018, has increased 15% over the last 10 years. I mean, a steady march higher. And if you look at production per cow, it's also increased 13% over the last 10 years, a steady march higher. Basically, producers are very efficient. Anybody who produces in this room, y'all are the best. Y'all keep finding ways to be more and more efficient. Lastly, we have the milk cows in the United States, and that's been in a fairly tight range. This 9 million here up to this 9.4. It's increased 2% over the last 10 years, but you notice the last year here it's kind of taken a dip, partially I think because of the downturn there. So when we have all this product, what do? We export this, and I got this graph from my friends at Fapri, basically just saying exports are going to be a bigger and bigger part of the dairy industry, and they're expected to grow out over time, particularly the dry milk powder. Right? That's the bulk, majority of what we're exporting, that cheese. So because of that, just wanted to touch on the policy side, since I do work in a policy center, and I'm going to talk more about the Farm Bill here in a bit. We had the trade disruption, so they came up with the Market Facilitation Program. Everybody knows it as MFP. And dairy producers were paid 12 cents per hundredweight, which is estimated to spend about $254 million in this country. This was based on our representative dairy, and I'm going to talk about what a representative dairy is. But at 12 cents, at 230 hundredweights, 1,000 head, that would be a gross number they would get. There would be sequestration taken out of this and some other things. It would be about $27,600 our representative dairy here in Nevada would have received from MFP. So I made mention of this. This is what Brian and I do full time. Our center has been working with representative farms, ranches, and dairies for over 35 years. I haven't actually been around doing it that long, but our center has. And so we actually go around, I mentioned we go around to different parts of the country, meet with producers. Hopefully we're going to have some producers we meet with this afternoon. It's a very important project because we meet face-to-face with them every 2 to 3 years. And currently we have 94 panels we meet with in 30 different states. And we gather data and we put it in our simulation model, not to get too nerdy on you. And then we're able to project that out over into the future. And for our latest projections, we're from 2019 to 2024. And we generally collect a couple of years of history just to help calibrate us to make sure that we're right, or as accurate as possible in our projections. So this is a map of where we meet, where we have our panels. This thing is supposed to be a milk jug, and that's where our dairies are represented, which includes the one here in Fallon, 1,000 head dairy, representative dairy we have here in Fallon. In our cattle, we have a ranch here up in the Elko area, 650 head, one down in Caliente, 550 head, and we have the rest of them scattered across the country. We have some wheat farms, feed grain farms, and cotton, rice across the country in all of these different states. So we had some assumptions. I'm not going to get into them too much. This is kind of getting down in the weeds. But we did have the MFP program factored into our projections. And we had the dairy margin program in there as well. I'll talk about that in detail after I get through with this. But the real power of our representative farms, and I'm going to talk about this, I have some examples, is doing what-if scenarios. Our main job, after we collect this data, put it together, get it vetted with our producers that we meet with, is to supply the ag committees of the United States Congress information when they ask us. And they say, okay, what happens if we change farm policy like X? Well, we run our representative panels through our projections, through our simulation forecast, and we're able to give them information. We say, here's the status quo, here's what it looks like after you make your change. And we don't make recommendations because we're not elected to make policy. We just try to help them, give them information so that they can do their job better and make a more informed policy. So we classify our farms. Basically, we can spit out more numbers than anybody wants to look at. So we color code them and make them green if they're in good shape, marginal is yellow, and red is poor. And it's based on these factors. And be honest, if you're in marginal condition, not that great. You have at least a 25 to 50% chance of having negative ending cash and the same percentages of losing real net worth. Just to look at where our dairies are located, it just shines in on the map a little better without all the rest of the farms on there, the clutter. We're spread out, and we probably, in all honesty, probably need to put a dairy somewhere in this area, because if you look at where the growth is happening in dairy cattle, it's coming from, if I can remember correctly, it's coming from Texas, Idaho, Washington, Colorado, and Kansas. Those are where you're seeing the growth of dairy cows. And those are big operations. I think Wisconsin, Arizona, and Utah are holding steady. If you take the rest of the states combined, they're losing cows. Now that's not saying that Nevada is losing cattle, that's just saying when you take the rest of them as an aggregate, the aggregate of all the rest of the states are losing cattle. So this is in our publication, and this is busy. I'm going to go over it very, very quickly, but if you want to go to our website and learn more about it, you can. But basically, we give a ranking of our representative farms, how they look, color-coded in 2024. So we project them out in 2024 on how they look. The Nevada dairy, there's yellow, so they're in the marginal category, and they're marginal on cash flow and just barely green, or in the green category. We're yellow. Got improved a little bit on the net worth side. Overall, we had 12 in the good, 4 marginal, and 5 in the poor categories. And it's based on those two metrics. We put them together to get an overall ranking here. So that's a little bit nerdy. But we figured out that we have just moved to a new simulation model, and we need to adjust our debt assumption for it. And the way we were doing things, so we ran a second alternative. So these are all of our dairies here on the bottom, and the orange represents our higher debt alternative as opposed to what we ran under our baseline. And obviously higher debt is worse. I'm not breaking any ground there, but what it did is it turned them, I believe, from the overall ranking went to only 6 good, 9 in marginal, and 6 in poor. So the vast majority of those, there would be 15 in the marginal and poor category once we make our adjustment to our debt assumption. So really forecasting the stress in the dairy industry. We also have ranches, and like I mentioned, we have the 2 ranches in Nevada, and the rest of them spread across basically the western part of the U.S. Our ranches are somewhat of a similar story. We have 4 classified as good in 2024, 5 in marginal, 1 in poor. But they're really being buoyed here by the net worth side. Otherwise, we'd have a lot more red ranches. And that part is because the cattle prices, as Mike talked about, bottomed and are expected to go up. That gives them a little more value on their balance sheet. And then land appreciation, the value of land, I said, is helping them out as well. But 6 of our 10 cattle ranches are experiencing high levels of cash flow stress. Now I did this, and Tom has been after me for a while to do this. So Tom, I finally did it. We ran an alternative on our ranches where they had a 50% reduction in their federal animal units that they can graze. And obviously, it's very, very bad for the one in Caliente, our representative ranch there. This is ending cash. They were already negative. It grows by twice that. Now, just because they lost 50% of their animal units doesn't mean that their head went down by 50%, because they do have some private land and some cash lease land that they run on as well. Although the Caliente Ranch was the highest percentage, I think it was in the about 46% of their herd reduction. We did reduce some labor and some other costs because they didn't have as much cattle. You can see that our Elko Ranch and our Montana Ranch weren't as affected. Part of that is because of hay, and to be honest, we probably need to rerun this and make a little different assumption. We assumed that if the cattle weren't there and they're making hay, they would be able to sell that hay. But we probably need to go back and adjust the hay price, because if the cattle aren't there, there's not going to be as much demand for hay. Their hay's not going to be worth as much, or they're going to have to pay a transportation cost to get the hay that they're not now feeding to their reduced herd to somebody else's cows. So we'll probably go back. So this is the best case scenario of losing 50% of their animal units. Best case, which is a big deal. So we have some numbers now, Tom, and we're going to adjust these, and we'll get these numbers to you as well. So I want to talk about farm policy a little bit, dairy policy, and I wouldn't be a good economist if I didn't have a disclaimer, right? So you always have to say something could change and I could be wrong, because as an economist, you're only as good as your assumptions. Our assumptions are based on talking with congressional staff and ag committee staff and reading the Farm Bill, but it never fails that in implementing the Farm Bill, there's always something different than what you would have expected. Part of that is just the nuts and bolts of having to implement a program. Sometimes they're a little bit different, sometimes it has to do with data or so forth and so on. So if something is different than what if I go over today, I'm going to blame it on not having the actual rules and regs for most of this yet, okay? So in the Farm Bill, there's two things particularly affecting livestock, on the livestock portion. These disaster programs that have been around for a while, the Livestock Indemnity Program and the Livestock Forage Program, otherwise as LIP and LFP, they're both still around. A LIP pays if you have animals that die, basically because of natural disasters, fires, floods, blizzards. When you see these big things, a lot of people who lose head can file under this LIP program. And they changed it a little bit in the 2018 Farm Bill. It updates the eligibility causes of loss to include disease and death of unweaned livestock. So now pretty much all livestock's deaths are consolidated under this program, the LIP. They were slightly under a different program beforehand. And livestock forage, it's a big deal. I don't know if it's a big deal here in Nevada, but it's a huge deal in Texas, obviously because of this covers grazing losses due to drought. Y'all never have any drought here, do you? No, okay. That's what I thought. Not right now. Not right now. Yeah, give it a day or two, it'll change, right? That's how it is in Texas. Not going to talk about CRP. I don't think there's much CRP land here in Nevada, but I did want to mention EQIP, which got a big bump in the 2018 Farm Bill. The funds are going to be up to a little over $2 billion by fiscal year 2023. This is good because EQIP has historically been one of the most popular programs there is. Throughout the entire nation, there is generally more applications put in for EQIP than there has been funding, if you look over the history of the program. And so they recognized that, and they found some money to enhance the EQIP program, the Farm Bill. Now I talked to Tom. He says that y'all don't have feral swine here, but that's still here. He says y'all have horses and donkeys, which maybe I'll get to see some on my ride back. But I did want to mention, they started this feral swine eradication program, $75 million for a pilot program. That's probably a drop in the bucket given the scale of the problem, but it is a good start. They'll be able to learn, take what they learn, and then focus further efforts in that area. An Animal Disease Prevention Network, the National Animal Health Network, And the vaccine bank that some people have talked about, the foot and mouth disease vaccine bank, it did make it into the Farm Bill. I think there's about 300 million allocated for that. Is that probably enough money? It would be, let me just be frank, if I had 300 million, I wouldn't be here today. All right? So that's a lot of money, right? It's a lot of money. I'd probably be, I don't know where I'd be, but I tell you that it probably is a good start, and to be honest, if we wanted to really prepare for all these diseases, we would probably need more funds. Because we'd hate to see something happen here in this country like African swine fever, which is going on in China. They're having a big problem with that. So I think this is well worth it, and they did get a good start on that, getting the vaccine bank. So I intended to get in the weeds here. I don't know how much I'm going to get in. I'm probably going to go over it at a higher level now than I intended to before. But dairy actually changed in 2018 before they passed the Farm Bill and the Bipartisan Budget Act that was passed in February of 2018. And they took the MPP dairy program and they made these changes to it. They moved the margin period from bi-monthly to monthly. They increased this tier 1, and if you don't know the dairy program, I don't want to get into it, but basically they have different premiums you pay to get into this program for your first 5 million pounds of milk than you do for all the rest of your production. And they increased that tier 1, which has the lower premiums, by 1 million pounds. And then they also lowered the tier 1 rates, and they did that in February. Well, then they passed the Farm Bill, and they realized that the stress the dairy sector was under, and the dairy portion of the Farm Bill probably changed more than any other section of the Farm Bill under this 2018 Farm Bill. All these changes in there, they renamed it, so you were probably used to the acronym MPP for the Margin Protection Program. Now it's DMC, Dairy Margin Coverage. And it eliminates the restrictions between having DMC and LGM insurance. So if anybody takes the livestock insurance, you couldn't take both of them in the same year. You had to pick. Now you can take them in the same year, you just can't cover the same production, which is a clarification there. So they eliminated that. And the rules aren't exactly out on how that's going to work, but that's how it's written in the bill. And they increased the coverage options. Mike talked about this. Now you can buy a margin at $8.50, $9, $9.50. But it's only for the first 5 million pounds of your production. So they really did try to do their best to protect those smaller dairies. Those ones, 5 million pounds, depending on where you're at, is somewhere about 200 to 250 cow dairy, about 5 million pounds. Expanded the range of coverage from 5% to 95%. Previously, you had to take at least 25% coverage was the minimum, and only up to 90. Production history stays the same, wrong button, as in the 2014 Farm Bill. And if you choose to make a 5-year decision, basically if you go down when this sign-up starts, and you choose to sign up and make your decision for the life of the Farm Bill for those 5 years, and say, I'm locked in, they're going to reduce your premium rates another 25%. So what are those premium rates? Premium rates are here. These are the new rates for the old MPP. These are how they changed under the DMC. And this is the DMC premium rates if you choose a one-time 5-year selection. Now, in a kind of a tip of the hat to the larger dairies, it's $5 level of coverage. If you look here, it's half a cent, essentially, per hundredweight, or per million pounds there, per hundredweight of coverage. That is reduced 88% from where they were before on your tier 2 coverage. And basically they tried to make this catastrophic $5, this lower margin is basically catastrophic level. They tried to make it more affordable for larger dairies, realizing now you can come in on your first 5 million pounds of production and buy up here, and then on the rest of your production, you can go down here and buy these cheaper marginal rate, or lower rates, kind of catastrophic levels of coverage there. And so beforehand, you had to have one coverage level for all of your production. Now, if you choose up here, and it's not clear, maybe even you can have them for both, but definitely if you choose these rates that aren't available in Tier 2, you can choose another rate, have two different rates on your two different tiers, which is new. So we ran, again, our scenarios with our representative dairies, and we wanted to take a look at how effective these rates might be. So we ran one under the $4 rate and one at $9.50, see which ones were better. And you can see that the smaller dairies liked it. The larger dairies, this Idaho 3000, even California 2000, actually get worse under the assumptions we made under the $9.50. Why is that? It goes back to these premium rates and the size of the dairy. We assumed that on it would take $9.50 here, and our assumption may be faulty, but then we went down to the $6.50 rate here. And as it turns out, it doesn't take these large dairies long before they get over the 5 million pounds of production under Tier 1. Then they cover the rest at the $6.50 rate, which was way more expensive coverage, which actually makes them worse off under this $9 rate, $9.50 rate, because they only get to cover the first 5 million pounds. But all these smaller, moderate-sized dairies, they all improve. Every one of them is improved, including our Nevada dairy 1000 is improved under that scenario. And again, the largest dairies actually get a little bit worse. So, as Mike said, this is the crux of that program is aimed at the smaller dairies, but there is a way for larger dairies, the way they design the program, to take advantage of it. And hopefully I'm going to point that out here in just a second. It allows dairies that were prohibited from participating in the MPP program following the premium reduction in 2018 to retroactively enroll in coverage. Basically, if you were prohibited because you had LGM or for some other prohibition, you can now go back retroactively, if you qualify, select your coverage levels for 2018. Now, we know what the margins are for 2018, so it's a math problem to go back to see if you can go back, perhaps get a little bit of extra support. And it provides an opportunity to use 75% of your net premiums paid for MPP. So if you were a dairy producer and you were in this MPP program and you paid more in premiums than you got in indemnities from 2014 to 2017, you can elect to receive 75% back as a credit to enrolling in the new DMC program, or you could just get a check for 50% of your net premiums as a direct refund. So if you were in that program and you paid more in than you got back, under these 2 years, this time period, you can get some of your premiums back. This is kind of a timeline. I put these in here because there was an update given some of the folks in Washington on where some of these things stood. I want to talk about this first point in a little bit, but it's about, it's a different side. But on March 22nd, the FSA announced dairy producers who elected to participate in the LGM for dairy can now retroactively participate in MPP for 2018. Like I said, you can go back and retroactively participate in that program, which we know already happened, what the results were of it. And then for our representative dairy, if we had a chance to go back, I worked the math. The best option for our representative dairy here in Nevada is to go back and select $8 margin, but cover only 25%, cover the least amount of production, and they would get a net of around $17,000 for 2018, if they were eligible to go back and retroactively get back into that program. Actually, the reason they predict, and this is what I think a lot of the bigger dairies are going to do, take only as much of your production into this new program as you cover under Tier 1, because those premiums are low, and you can cover those high margins. And then cover the rest, whatever's over, at a very low level, and only cover the production that about goes in Tier 1. That way, actually what happened if they would have, in this scenario, if they would have chosen to produce or production level, they would have chose actually less than 25% because basically they were clearing money on the first tier and losing money on their second tier. So having less production covered would have been beneficial. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. It's about this high quality alfalfa hay from top 5 milking states. On May 1, the FSA will begin these reimbursements to eligible MPP dairy producers for the premiums between those that time period. And on June 17th, the FSA is to begin sign up for the new DMC program. And this is going to provide coverage retroactively to January 1st, 2019. So basically, you'll even know some of the margins at the beginning of this year when you sign up starting June 17th. What's interesting is in the Farm Bill, it was put in there that NASS would start printing these this new hay price that works into the margin. And I've already gotten into weeds probably too much already than I wanted to. But they're going to produce this new hay price based on these top 5 milk producing states. And they also put in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. And that is to reflect the actual cost of alfalfa to a dairy. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm actually the county executive director for Churchill County.
Yes, sir.
FSA, and we've already projected that there's going to be payments for both January and February, and at the tier 1 level, with the 2 payments through, we'll actually be you'll actually be getting a net payment already. Your premium will be covered by what you're actually getting paid.
Yeah. I stole my thunder a little bit, but I still got to get to that. But that's a good point. At least you backed up my math so people know I'm correct, right? What is of interest is the Farm Bill said, you go out and create this new price because we thought that the all alfalfa price is too low to put in the feed margin. Dairy people buy higher quality alfalfa than just some normal run-of-the-mill price. So they came up with this new price. And it turns out that for this year, it's $45 a ton higher. They just started doing it because they were mandated to, NASS did. $40 and $45 a ton higher. Which if you put that into the new margin program, reduces the margin by over 50 cents in this program. So what does that do? If you are already in the money, you're now 50 cents more in the money if they start using this price. Now, I've seen conflicting reports. I've heard conflicting reports whether it's going to get used or not. The actual margins that they put out on the website do not reflect this, but there is some scuttle that this could be put in there, which would make the margin coverage even a better safety net. So we ran again our dairies and we looked at this and we said, hey, what if we use this new hay price as opposed to the old one in here? How does that look? Well, we ran this one at the $4 level, the old hay and the new hay. All the dairies in this moderate size all liked the new hay price better. They were all improved. And to be honest, even the larger dairies were better with the new hay price put in there at the $4 level. And they were better, actually, I did some more math and some more running, they were actually better even at the $9.50 level. The only level they didn't like it at was the $6.50 level straight across. The dairies, the larger dairies like that. And so the larger dairies with the new hay actually are better under this new hay being used in the formula. So this is something the Farm Bureau did, and basically it's a historical look back. If the new DMC would have been in place from 2015 to 2018. This is what actually happened under the old MPP, the original MPP. This is the new one that went in the Bipartisan Budget Act in 2018. The green represents payments to producers, and this is the new DMC coverage. This is only on Tier 1, but these are the net benefits under Tier 1 that would have occurred from that same time period. So you can see they worked to make this program a better safety net than it was before. Now, our friends at FAPRI say the new safety net will trigger payments. Now, will they be large? Is this a silver bullet? Is this going to fix all our woes? No. No. But every little bit, when you're in a financial tough times, every little bit's going to help. And so, from that perspective, if you look at these projected prices, they're at least under the $9.50 level and somewhere below the $9 mark as well. And as my friend in the back pointed out, the margins are here. They've already been released for this year, February and January. The margin is $7.98, $8.21. That's without the new hay price. If the new hay price was put in there, if it keeps running like it is, then this margin is even going to be lower. This would be closer to like $7.50. This would be closer to like $7.75. So this is what the old hay price put in there. Now, and so what's going to happen if you have tier 1 coverage at the $9.50 level? You're going to get basically $9.50 minus that payment on your first 5 million pounds. That's how the program works. And so certainly with these first 2 months already factored in, if you haven't looked at this program or you got soured because you paid more in than you got out of before, I would give it another look because it's changed substantially. A little bit on sources. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I will now take any questions you might have that are at least easy enough that I might be able to answer them, okay? So, any easy questions, I'll take them, and if not, I'm going to let Brian and Peter answer them. Yes?
You mentioned in the beginning, talking about the increase in value in ag lands. And I guess I was curious, maybe you could touch on that a little more. I know you did, but and how much the decrease in availability of these lands, like urban interface and urban growth boundaries, kind of affect that, or if there's another root cause.
That's a really good question. So if everybody heard him, he was talking about the land values and the kind of the value staying high and how much of that is like basically urban pressure. There's a lot of that. I mean, you know, this country's growing, particularly, we're in Texas and we're adding, I can't remember the exact number, but we're adding about 1,200 people to our state every day. And it is incredible the growth we're seeing in urban areas and big cities, and you think that that wouldn't be that big a deal, but you hear stories. So for example, we have the Eagle Ford Shale in Texas and the Permian Basin with all of our oil. Now I've heard from folks that they became millionaires overnight, especially at the beginning of the Eagle Ford Shale. And they didn't know what to do, so some of them are in agriculture that have these lands, either pasture land they found oil on or their farms. And so they're investing, and they're buying land in Iowa. They're buying land in the Texas Panhandle. And there are some bigger, I've gone to places in this country where there's some foreign investment coming in. They're diversifying. Some of it's from South America. I've even heard some from China. They come and buy land, and they generally sublease it out, but they're willing to pay above market for this land. And then of course you just have the urban interface where people want to get out, they want to hunt, they want to be able to get out in the country. That's a lot of pressure on land. Now, have land values come down in this downturn? Yes. Have they come down near as far as the commodity prices have come down? Not close. Not close. In most parts of the country, it's not close. It's only a fraction. And from a balance sheet perspective, when we go back to is that the 80s, that certainly helps your balance sheet to have that higher value land on there. But it doesn't necessarily help your cash flow, right? Particularly if you're going to happen to look to expand. Or rent. Sorry, so I appreciate the question. Yes, Tom?
I think a unique thing in Nevada is we're one of the top fastest growing states, but also we're 87% public land. So I think we're the 10th largest in land mass, but you take all the public lands out, we're the 9th smallest. So even though it looks like you got a lot of empty land out here, you can build on it. So with great population causes that value of that land to stay up.
There's a lot of that. It's a funny contrast because you hear places, particularly like in the Northeast, And really the downturn in dairy has always kind of hit the Northeast the hardest, historically, I think. And this time it's seeped across the entire industry. But in the Northeast, they're trying to keep people there. They're losing people, and they're all migrating to warmer areas, west and south. So it's a big issue. But productive farmland, productive ranch land is in high demand. Any other questions? Did I get too deep in the weeds and bore y'all with all my little charts there, trying to go through the MPP program or the DMC program? Not enough coffee. Well, I appreciate y'all's time and let me ramble over here. Don't forget to call Tom T-Bone. And thank y'all. Appreciate it.